Doesn't, it's not clicking. Oh, is it on?
There, it just clicks this way.
Oh,
So the icon home will be going through this.
okay, so, okay. Alrighty, so, let's go ahead and get started. I want to be mindful of everybody's time, so, we'll get started right now. And, for those of you, may have some people coming in, so we'll be a little bit, mindful of the fact people are coming in to get some food. I want to welcome you all here, both the ones that are here and those of you that are virtual. I would say, I would appreciate you coming on a rainy day, but I know some of you don't have to worry about a rainy day. So, but anyway, so happy to have you here. I'd like to introduce John Newby, and also thank him for his support for all these opportunities we have to get together and to talk and to share information. So, John, would you like to say a few things?
Sure, Liz. Thanks so much. Hello, everyone. John
Can't hear you,
Newby.
John. Yes.
Is that us?
It may be you. Lisa, can you hear me?
There is.
Yes, I can hear you perfectly, John.
Okay.
We're good.
Okay, you're good?
Yeah.
Okay, great. That's not a problem. Well, hello, everyone. Good afternoon. John Newby here. I'm the CEO of the Virginia Biotechnology Association, and we're really happy to partner with the SBDC ICAP program to bring you this very informative conversation. One of Virginia Bio's objectives is to support the startup community with support and information helpful to grow our industries. And Virginia Bio is partnered with 5 regional biohubs, including Northern Virginia, who you see on the screen, and Go Virginia to bring you a program that we call Virginia Bio Connect. And Virginia Bio Connect, what it does is it provides several resources to everyone in Virginia, irrespective of where you are, including our vabioconnect.org resource website, internship programs, and highlighted today is our life science mentors at the SBDC ICAP program, one of whom is Liz. Liz is one of 3 life science mentors that we're happy to support, and is an expert on the topic of FDA and all things life science business. So if you're lucky enough to have her as a mentor, congratulations, you're going to do very well. But hey, really appreciate everyone being here today, and I'm really looking forward to hear what Liz has to say on this very important topic. And there's more to tell than just one conversation. I believe this is a multi-part conversation on FDA. So without further ado, Liz, thank you for doing this, and I'll hand it back over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'd also like to thank Amy for hosting us here and for doing a lot of the behind the scenes connecting all the technology, along with Lisa, who is one of our backbone people that make sure that we all stay on task and that we are where we're supposed to be. So Amy, I'm gonna go ahead and pass it off to Helena.
I'll just go ahead and stay here. Hi, can everyone hear me? Great. I'm Helena Kondo. I am the new business development manager for life sciences in Prince William County Department of Economic Development. And I'd like to give a little bit of an overview of our life science ecosystem, specifically highlighting our wet lab space, because I know there is an unmet need currently within the state to be able to have lab spaces. So I would like to talk about how Prince William County is filling that unmet need currently.
Oh. Let me just set this computer.
Big person.
That robot. No. 1 second.
I can just hit enter.
She got the magic finger.
There we go. Actually, good now.
Great. So to kind of take a little bit of a high level overview of the facilities that we have, I'd like to take a step back and highlight what we have at Innovation Park. Innovation Park is a space for companies to come to expand their physical footprint within the life science and biotech industry, as well as other industries as well. This is a really nice graphic of that area within Prince William County. It's really close right here to the Manassas campus for Mason. And we can highlight here the 2 wet lab facilities that we have on campus here, the Bioscience Center and the Prince William Science Accelerator. At the Prince William Science Accelerator, it has been around for, I think approximately like 8 years or so, since 2014. I'm one of the lead individuals who manages this build, the accelerator. We have 9 wet lab spaces ranging from anywhere from like about 300 square feet all the way up to like 860 square feet. Office spaces included in that. When it comes to the type of equipment that is within the spaces, many of which are outfitted with fume hoods and biosafety cabinets. Folks have access to conference rooms as well as a kitchen to help sort of build community there. And what I'd really like to highlight is that in close proximity to both the Bioscience Center and our accelerator is a newly established vivarium that companies have the opportunity to utilize at a neighboring biotech Caris Discovery. That is accessible to companies within this region, but it can also support the entire state of Virginia as well if there are any needs. I'd also like to point out that folks who are on the accelerator, they get a year membership of Virginia Bio membership, which is really helpful with some of those cost-effective programs for buying consumables as well as equipment. And then here is our newly established Northern Virginia Bioscience Center. It opened back in March, so before I started. And similar to the accelerator, it can support BSL-2 work. This building was designed particularly to sort of support the expansion of footprint. So folks who are graduating from the accelerator can move on to the Bioscience Center to have larger space. The space here ranges from about 1,200 square feet to all the way up to 5,600 square feet. But all the suites there have both a fume hood and a biosafety cabinet as well as a refrigerator and freezer. So it's really nicely outfitted. And then similar to the accelerator, we have communal lab equipment, so like an autoclave, deionized water system. Just like the accelerator, it is close to the vivarium, so a really great opportunity there. So if you'd like to learn more about these different facilities, whether these can fit your needs, I would like to note that both at the accelerator and the Bioscience Center, we have space available. So please reach out to me. I can share my contact info for people directly contact me, but I'll turn it over to Liz. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk.
And you're providing a tour after this for anybody.
Yes, I'll be providing a tour of the Bioscience Center after. Yeah.
I will be sure to end in plenty of time, so you can go for that tour, because I think it's really important to actually go see the facilities. Pictures don't do it justice. You really need to go see and get a feel for the space. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to just talk a little bit about and introduce you to the other 2 life science business mentors that John mentioned. So one of our really key people is William McPhee, and his background comes from pharma. So William, would you like to say a few words?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Liz. So I was asked just to say a couple of words about overview of the ICAP program. And so ICAP is a program of George Mason University and the Virginia Small Business Development Center Network. And we are fortunate to receive funding from VITC, the Cyber Initiative, Go Virginia, and also VA Bio. We provide technology and innovation-driven startups and young companies with long-term mentorship and assistance from ideation stage all the way through really to like Series A funding, helping with validation of business models, fundraising, and so forth. We have a number of different programs and also in a lot of interactions with accelerators, incubators, investors, and so on. We actually have a team of, at the moment, of about 20 ICAP mentors, of which Liz, Philip, and I are 3 focusing on life science. We work with companies one-to-one and provide the support of the nature that I was just describing a little bit earlier. The 20 of us have a huge variety of backgrounds and experiences, so there's a lot that you can all tap into. Are we having an impact? Well, some numbers that we had that are really exciting just recently, that over the 5 years that ICAP program has been in existence, we've worked with more than 1,000 startup companies who have gone on to raise over 100 million in capital. And we actually heard just yesterday that we've also passed now the 20,000 hours of mentoring over those 5 years. So I hope that's an impressive impact for you all. Just finally to note that even more impressive is that ICAP is offered at no cost, not something that you hear often these days, and that it's completely confidential. All you need to do to get access to ICAP is to contact any of the mentors, and we'll take things from there. So thanks to everyone, and looking forward very much to my colleague Liz Pyle's presentation today.
Okay, thank you, William. I appreciate you for all you do to help keep our startups going, and also that keeps our life science team moving forward. So the other person in our team is Philip Summer. Is Philip on yet?
Yes.
Oh, there you are. Say hi to everybody.
Hi, folks.
Do you have anything to add? I see you've got a nice background.
Yes, I have my Virginia background, though it doesn't look like that right now since it's fall or winter. No, I've been with the program and Liz and William for 9 months now, and it's been great fun.
And just for disclosure, Philip and I go way back to about what, 2010, when you came to UVA?
Actually, 2005.
Whoa, okay, I've known you that long.
Yeah. And only gotten younger. So I ran the entrepreneurship program at Darden Business School and taught at the business school. And my early career was in life science investing. I ran a venture fund at Oppenheimer, and I at Pfizer before that. So, and now I'm a mentor and act as an angel investor as well.
So you can see that we've got a pretty wide background of expertise. It's, we pull it all together. And when we work with also pull in people as you need them when you need them to give support. So with that, I want to say thank you all. I appreciate you all every day. You make my life easier. So it comes now time to, let me see if I can get this smooth. Yes. So as you all know, the FDA, it is a big government agency. It's sprawling, it's big, it's complicated. And in my experience, I have found that a lot of folks that get involved with the FDA, they run into trouble because they don't know the basics of the FDA, which is some of the basic definitions, some of the different classifications. So that's the purpose of part one, is to really provide you with that foundation. And this is going to be a series. We haven't quite decided what the next one will be, but that's a conversation we'll be having in the next couple of weeks, is to figure out and plan out the next series of presentations. And it'll be a whole variety of things, but the FDA will be certainly part of it. So I just want to do one last.
If you stand in front of the screen, they can see at least you. They won't be able to see people in the room, but they can see.
Oh, so I can't wander. Darn. I mean, I'm used to being a moving target, so you can't get me, you know, when I'm talking. So, yeah, I just want to do a shout out to the people for all their support they've given us, the IPC, Go Virginia, the Commonwealth of Cyber Initiative, and Virginia Bio. Without their support.
You're good, you're good.
Okay, without your support, we wouldn't be here today. Oh, I just have to touch.
this.
So we have some hopeful learning objectives that we'll get to today, and that's a little bit of the FDA history, which I found really fascinating. The FDA's role in regulating, and I have medical devices in here because that's where my area of expertise, and it gives you an example of how it goes through. But it's not just for medical devices, so just know that. We'll define what a medical device is, which is very important. We'll have classifications, basics, the different regulatory pathways, and a little bit of note about quality systems. I'm very much a proponent of making sure you get your quality management system in place in the beginning, because that is something that's going to be asked of you. And I know a lot of people don't like to do them because they're time consuming and take time, but they will serve you well by doing that. So I want to give a little plus for that. And then next steps. So when I was getting ready for this presentation, I delved into the history, and I was really surprised at some of what I've learned, but it is the oldest government agency. It started back in 1848. I had no idea that it was that long ago, but they were starting to realize that there were problems with monitoring agricultural products, what was going into the things that were being sold. You know, people were selling honey as cures. And then when they did studies on what was actually in the bottles, it was corn syrup with a couple of food colors, some coloring. But they were selling it for those types of things. So, and, you know, so there was this question about, you know, what's in the bottle, what is truly in that bottle. So, and then the other interesting information is the additives that were put in that nobody was regulating. Nobody knew what was the additives. Nobody knew what the impact of those additives were on humans. So, but the Department of Agriculture, took responsibility, and in 1862 was later taken over by what is sort of the early stages of the FDA, that like we know it today. And so there was a gentleman, Harvey Wiley. Yeah, Harvey Wiley, who was considered to be the father of the FDA. And he was a chemist, and he was really interested in what are the additives and what they were doing. So back in about 1902, he started a study, which ended up being one of the first clinical trials. And his study was 12 volunteers that he gave food to, and he had one additive in there, and then everybody ate the food, and they waited to see what the reaction was. It was called the Poison Squad. So that was an interesting way of how things got started. I had no idea. But, and the other thing that would surprise me is it wasn't until, and some of you were younger, but than me, but in 1976 is when they had the first medical device amendments to the Federal Food, Drug and Cosmetic Act, which that wasn't, for me, that doesn't seem that long ago. So part of my life was totally with food, who knew what was going on. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing that I learned. It was a little scary to learn that, but yeah, and a lot of people died before they put in these regulations. So that's sort of the history. We will find that as through time, and I saw this too, that the FDA changed, and it changed as a result of social, economic, political, and legal changes just in the evolution of the United States. But the main focus has always been to promote public health and safety. You know, we can say all we want to complain about the FDA, but that is their main purpose, is public health and safety. So again, the role of the FDA is regulations to cover food, drugs, biologics, cosmetics, animals. That was a new one for me to learn about the animals, and veterinary medicine and tobacco. So they've got a huge thing that they're trying to monitor. And without any kind of regulatory clearance by the FDA, most of our innovations and important breakthroughs will never reach the patients. That's how much control they have. you have to have FDA clearance or approval to be able to get into. So that's really important to know. So, and the steps involved can be vague, arbitrary, and long at times. And some of the pharma with those clinical trials, they're years and years. So it's a big job they have. Okay. The other thing I didn't know is there's 5 major divisions of the FDA. You've got the Division of General Restorative and Neurological Devices. You have a division of Cardiovascular Devices. You have a division of Ophthalmic and ENT Devices. Division of Reproductive, Abdominal, and Radiological Devices. And then a division of Anesthesiology, General Hospital, Infection Control, and Dental Devices. So I thought it was just one big FDA, but you really have to know when you're doing your innovations, which division does your thing fall into? Because each division does something differently. They classify it slightly differently. They have controls that they implement slightly differently. So it's really important to understand what division that you fall into. And I put this in there just to show how big this organization is. And that's not even down to the people that you and I would be talking to. Okay, so it's a complex organization. And then this one is just the one for medical devices. So these aren't even people we would be talking to every day. So it's a complex organization, which makes getting through the FDA process can be complex. An important thing is what is a medical device? And it's their definition of a medical device, not what you think a medical device is. It's what they think of it as. And it's an instrument, apparatus, machine, or implant, in vitro agent, including component parts or accessories, and I have that down there. It has to be recognized by the National Formulary. It can diagnose, cure, mitigate, treat, or prevent disease in a patient or animals. And that animals keeps coming up. That surprises me because I didn't know that. And it has to affect the structure or the function of a part of a patient. Now, in the definition, it says does not include software functions. That's changing. So that's why I added in their exceptions. If you go into the main definition on the website, it doesn't have, there may be exceptions. I added that in there. They just came out with an announcement that they're looking at the telemed. It's what that software does that makes it part of the FDA. So just because you're developing an app, you really have to sit down and think and go back to this definition and say, what is this truly doing? So that's really super important. So in order to market or sell any kind of medical device, it has to be registered, it has to be cleared, and it has to be approved by FDA. Okay. Questions? Okay. So once we have that defined, we have different classes. So you figured out which division you go to. You checked the information on the definition of what a medical device is, and you figure, okay, I've got a medical device. Well, now you have to figure out what class is it. There's 3 classes, class 1, 2, and 3. And each one has different things for you to do. So class 1 is, and it all sort of focuses on risk assessment. So in class 1, the risk is minimal. Virtually no harm to a patient. Like the picture there is a tongue depressor. You may get a splinter, but basically there's no risk. It's typically has a very simple design. And most of them are exempt from a pre-market clearance. You don't have to do any clinical trials, proof of safety or efficacy, since it's there is another predicate device that already exists. So you've been able to match it to something that already exists, that has already gone through clearance. It's not subject to the requirements of 21 CRF Part 820, and that's a document that I have a link to it in my presentation. You need to be familiar with. Okay, so that's class 1. So what are the requirements? You have to register with the FDA. The device has to go on the register. It's a medical device listing. You have general FDA labeling requirements. Labeling is super, super important. And I have an example story. If we have time, I'll tell you about one of my experiences with labeling. And you have to have compliance with a quality system. So that's another reason why I'm really strong early on. The earlier you start building your quality management system, the better off you are. So examples are bandages, exam gloves, tongue depressors, surgical masks, stethoscopes. So simple things that you see every day. So now we get a little bit more complicated, complex. We have class 2. They tend to be non-invasive. They're more complex in design. They must provide data. You have to provide data that the device will perform as expected, because they're looking to see whether it's as good as or better than. It will show that it does not harm anybody or injury to anybody. And you need to have that FDA clearance. So this one is where your 510K process comes into play. So has anybody had experience doing a 510K? And what was your experience like?
Rigorous.
Same? So this is the painful part of the FDA. It's you need to have it. You may not necessarily agree with all the steps that you have to take, but they're the ones that are in control. You can, politely disagree if you can give them evidence of why, but odds are it's what's in the books. That's what they're going to follow. You will be working with somebody from the FDA. I strongly suggest you make them your bestest friend, because they'll be able to walk you through or help you get through some of the really difficult parts. So
Hey,
yes,
Liz, can we ask you a quick question from our side?
sure enough.
Yeah, so Anne was wanting to know, is for class 1, if devices are not allowed to claim outcomes?
That's a really interesting one.
And do you want to come off mute and ask Liz your question?
Excuse me. Hi, I only bring it up because I'm working with a startup here producing a class 1 device, and he's a serial entrepreneur in the medtech space, so he knows what he's doing. And he said what makes what the one thing about class 1 devices is you are not allowed to claim any outcomes from the FDA.
What?
Liz, can I jump in?
I don't know.
Sure.
Yeah, no, he's absolutely correct, because as soon as you say, I am curing, I am doing something with a medical outcome, you're putting yourself in a different class than a class 1. The whole point of a class 1 is that it's a tongue depressor. It's a means to getting information, but it doesn't by itself give you an outcome. And if you claim an outcome, I'm going to make this patient better, then you're not a class 1.
Okay.
Perfect, thank you.
All right. Any other questions?
Yes, so Jen wanted to know, what is the QSR?
That's the quality system report.
Okay, thank you.
I think the R's report, yeah. Yeah, it's anything with a Q most likely has to do with quality control in some way, or quality report. And they're going to want make sure that, and there's a whole discussion about how you do quality reports and how you keep and maintain your reports. Some places, not some places, but there is a requirement of having paper reports. And there's always this discussion, well, we're in the electronic age, why can't it be electronic report for your lab reports and your lab books? There's always this back and forth of where you do that. And I know when I was with a company, you have your backup server, but you also have to have a backup server that's not even in the location. And you have to have all your paper documents, and then every night you have to cover them with tarp. So in case there's a fire and the fire comes, the water is not going to damage. That's assuming they can get the fire out before it got to the paper, but you had to put in all these little things in place. Okay, so if there's not another question, we'll continue on. Okay.
All set.
All right, good. So, so we're finishing off class 2. So examples would be X-ray machines, powered wheelchairs, infusion pumps, syringes, those kinds of things are class 2. So they're more complex. Okay. So then you come to the really difficult ones, is the class 3. They're typically implanted, they invade the body in some way, therapeutic, life-sustaining devices. A predicate device may be or may not exist in that class. FDA requirements must require approval with a pre-market approval. That's your PMA. And they must meet all the requirements of class 1 and class 2. So an example would be, those are the complex ones, like the pacemakers, the heart valves, those kinds of things where you're really invading the body. Okay. So to summarize this, I put together a table so you can see very quickly the different classes, the different risk levels, the general controls that are required for each one of those. And their submission status. And as you can see that sometimes, like for class 1, you may be required to do a 510K. So you have to really understand each one and what each one requires. And I'll say here in my research, the FDA website is full of really good information. It is not organized really well and very difficult to get through. But I was impressed that they do have check sheets so you can check your way through. They have flow charts. They have copies of all the forms you got to fill out. So it's all there. It's just really difficult to find at times. And I'll make a point here too, because some people will do this on their own, which is fine, depending upon the complexity. Some people will hire a consultant. And that's a decision that you make as business owners, as innovators. I caution you not to hire a consultant and then just say, you take care of all that. I'm going to go over here and go do my thing, and I'm not going to get involved. The reason is because if there is a problem, and it happens, you're liable, not the consulting firm. You have to pay the fine. You have to come up with the extra cash to do another clinical trial if something happens. So it's really important that if you have a consultant, which again, that's a good path to go, you still stay involved. You still understand all the things that they're doing. So so you can have a good conversation with them and keep them on track. But because it's ultimately on you, the responsibility of getting everything done and done right. Okay. I can't stress that enough. And it's just not with FDA consultants, it's with any consultant you have. You still are liable for what they do. Okay. I'll get off my soapbox on that one. So I mentioned the word general controls. Well, each classification has its own long list of general controls. So, and it starts with class 1. So class 2, they have to meet class 1 general controls and class 2 general controls. Class 3 has to do class 1, 2, and 3. So they build on each other, but this is just an example. These are by far not the whole list, but these are just an example of what some of the controls are that you may not have thought about. Labeling. Labeling is a big thing of control. Does it provide good information? It's medical device reporting. You have to report if there's any injuries, if there is any deaths, if there's any recalls. You're required to report that. Establishment of registration. You have to register your business with the FDA, which, you know, device listing, you have to identify it as a medical device, the quality management system, you have to ensure by documentation. And again, if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. This is something I would teach all my students. If, you know, they would say, oh, I made 10 customer discovery calls. Where's the documentation? Well, I talked to them. Well, then it didn't happen. Go out and do 10 more. So it has to be well documented. And then misbranding, that is a big thing. That addresses false or misleading labeling information. So these are just a small example of some of the controls. And again, there's lots of controls. I don't think anybody in their right mind could be able to memorize all the controls, but there's lots out there. And so this is another table, a diagram that Philip shared with me, which I really appreciated, because it shows exactly what we've been talking about. It shows the class, the different classes, the different risk levels, and then the path, the different possible paths down to either a clearance for the device to be on the market or whether you have to get approval. Okay. So I found that pretty interesting. And also, again, it highlights too the different controls and where they go with each one. Okay. So I found that really sort of put the jumble of information together in one little diagram, but it's important to really understand how they build on each other. Okay. So I wrote down some of the basic steps for someone that might want to go through the FDA process. And one of the things I wanted to stress too is to suggest that this process of you don't build your device and then go, okay, now I've got to do my FDA. You need to be making the decision earlier on. And the reason is because you'll probably come in the development of your idea of your product, where you come to a fork in the road, that if you do something this way, you're class 1. If you don't, you do something this way, you're class 2. But if you wait until you have all the information, you've developed your product and you're ready to sort of go to market, you'd like to go to market, you're too late. And then you could have made a decision that would have made it a class 1. So the earlier you start thinking about what is this FDA process I have to go through? How is it going to impact my idea? And as I bring it up to a market, are there decisions that can make it easier for me to get to market by making the decision then rather than later? Does that make sense? Yeah, a lot of people really do wait until the end. They do their research, they come up with an idea of market, and then they go linearly. Some of these things need to be done in parallel. Okay. So just to go through this, so you first thing, you have your idea. So the first thing you need to do is to go back to the description of what a medical device is and make sure that what you have is truly a medical device. Has all the characteristics of a medical device. So you're verifying that that is true. Then the next step you have to go to is to identify the classification and the regulatory pathway. There's lots of different ways you can go. So you have to figure out what that is. And the classification that you have, whether it's class 1, class 2, class 3, will indicate really whether you need that 510K or the PMA, or whether you can sort of, you don't need that. Okay. You need to develop and make sure you have really good data that supports the fact that it is safe and it's effective. It does what it says you say it does. All right. And then you have to put together your pre-market submission. So there's several different pre-market submission pathways. There's 5. It's the investigational device exemption. It's the pre-market notification, your 510K. It's your pre-market approval application, your PMA, de novo, and the humanitarian device exemption. So those are all decisions that you have to make as you go along. So you have to be thinking about these things. So you make sure you go, because you want the most efficient path to market. And so these are important decisions as you build your product. So the investigational device is the IDE, and it enables a device to be used during a clinical study. The purpose is to collect safety and effectiveness data. It requires approval by the Institutional Review Board, which is your IRBs. Many of you are familiar with IRBs, and that can be a process in itself to get the IRB. You must have consent from all patients. They have to know that you're using a device that's for investigational use only. So you have to have written consent there. And it requires, again, detailed records and reports. Everything has to be detailed, dated, I's and T's dotted. So then we do the 510K, which a lot of people are very familiar with. And most things are 510K. So you have to have that notification of intent to market. You have to do that 90 days before you actually launch. So you have to really plan when you're going to do this to make sure that gives you enough time. And that enables the FDA to determine if the device is equivalent to something that's already out there, so they can do their investigation to find out where you are on that, and gives you time to have a conversation. And again, they're really focusing on the extent of the safety and the effectiveness. And it must show that it's a substantial equivalence, and that's a term that pops up a lot in the FDA. It's substantial equivalence to a predicate that's already out there, that's already been approved. That's what makes the 510K a little easier than your PMA. Okay. And the comparison has to be based on intended use, the device features, and the performance testing. So you have quite a few things that you need to be aware of. Okay. Any questions on that one? You guys are quiet. It's a lot of information. So then you have the PMA, which is the pre-market approval application. That's the highest risk. That's your class 3s. Approval has to be received before you go and start marketing. They need to make sure your labeling is correct, that you have all your disclosures on there, and it meets all the safety and effectiveness requirements. It doesn't, a lot of the evidence does not require a predicate device. It has to be able to stand on its own. That's what makes this one so difficult and onerous. It has to really be standing on its own. And the FDA does, for this particular one, provide an administrative checklist to facilitate the application. A lot of people have consultants that help with this. Because usually it's the clinical trials are involved in this process. Okay. So then the other one is we have the de novo. If this is for a very, very novel medical device, there's no existing classification regulation. There's some seats. So you're basically creating something that's really brand new, novel. This application is very complex because there's nothing else out there. It's really, really super new. You're not going to see too many of these out there. So if considering this particular pathway was pathway, submitting a pre-submission to the appropriate pre-market review division for feedback is really important. Yes,
How do you determine if your device is de novo?
you call them up on the phone. Because there are plenty of people out there that have felt that they had a de novo, and then when they went to the FDA, they said no.
And is it simply the matter of them identifying a predicate device?
Yeah,
Okay, so it's like, if they see something.
if they
out
see
there
something and
that
then,
is similar to your device, they can qualify as a predicate. They'll consider your device not de novo.
yeah,
If you change the code though, so if you add an additional, the code, different things, so if you add an additional code that perhaps one of the predicate devices, or there isn't a predicate device that has that new code, then it will be different.
so that, and that's, yeah, so there's, so this is where working with your FDA person can be very helpful. It's important that you find that which you think is the predicate device, and then, well, what is the similarity? What are the differences? Is my code different enough?
Yeah, we were able, for one of the products we developed, to actually ask that question up for everybody. We developed a genetic test.
Mhm.
There was no predicate device for the exact kind of test we're developing. So we looked at the closest thing out there that wasn't even FDA approved yet. And we asked them, did you agree? that
Yeah.
This was a predicate of a device.
Yeah,
And then
Say,
they did.
oh, thank God.
Yeah, so it was good. I'm sorry, it was FDA. It was the closest thing.
Yeah.
FDA approved. In this case, it was 23andMe.
yeah,
So even though their test used DNA and one of our tests used RNA in different platform, it was a genetic test and they considered it enough for predicate.
yeah. But that's important to have that relationship with the FDA so you can have those conversations. A lot of people sort of look at the FDA as they're not the good guys. But the FDA, when you come and talk to them and really ask them good questions, make them part of your team. They can really help guide you a bit. I know I have one situation where it actually helped me sidestep something that could have been a penalty because they let me know ahead of time. So, okay, so thank you for that input. I appreciate that. So the other pathway is the humanitarian device exemption. And this has to be a medical device that was intended for patients in the treatment of a diagnosis of a disease that it affects no more than 8,000 people per year. So, and it's exempt from proof of effectiveness. It's only reasonable assurance of safety and probable benefit. So it's a really unique place. I don't hear that happening too often because the population has to be so small. Has anybody got an example of a humanitarian one? I was looking for one last night. So William, have you ever known of one?
No, I've not, I'm sorry, no.
Yeah. I'm sure it's out there. I just couldn't find it. Okay. So I've given you tons of information and it's kind of overwhelming, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. But I wanted to make sure that you have a really grounded foundation. And in the slide deck that I put together, I have some key resources on where I found a lot of information. And well, happy to share the slide deck with anybody that would be interested in it. But I'll just go through a couple and then I'll tell you I have 3 stories. So, and these were mainly, some of them, the key resources are specific to medical devices, but some of them are very general. Some of them are examples. I found a site that showed some devices that were approved, some of the denials, and which I thought was interesting, and some of the clearances, so you can get an idea. the FDA history was interesting. There is, if you go on YouTube and you type in the Poison Squad, they have a documentary on that whole Harvey Wiley. I watched some of it last night.
Liz, we have a couple of HDE examples in the chat. I can either read them or.
Yeah, read them.
Yeah, so Barbara Springer says an HDE example is at Walter Reed. They were performing, it looks osseointegration procedure with new advice. Barbara, do you want to come off mute and tell us how you know about this example?
Hi, yes, I was working with one of the surgeons, and with our combat amputees, it's a smaller population, and they were able to get that exemption to use the osseointegration devices in combat amputees.
Excellent. And then Carolyn, did you have an example to share?
Yeah, hi. Epicel, it's actually not a recent example, but it was autologous skin cells that were cultured on a 3T3 mouse monolayer and adhered to an adhesive, and that was used for burn treatment over greater than 30% of the body, and so that was approved as an HDE.
So what references or where are you going to find these? Or are these just situations that you happen to be personally knowledgeable of?
Carolyn, I think the question is to you.
Yeah, in my case, that's just something I was personally knowledgeable about.
Yeah, I was trying to look for some kind of a database that listed them. It is on the FDA. See, the FDA website's full of information.
Yeah, if you don't find it, put a different, like, search it a
Yeah,
different way.
yeah, I was just, yeah.
It's not easy to find.
Yeah, like I said, I was amazed at how chock full of information, anything you could ever want, a need for your FDA, but it is not an easy site to find at all, information. So I also threw in a book here, is Stefano Zinos. It's the bio design and process of innovating medical technologies. This was a book that was given to me several years ago, and I have found that to be a really good, it's a big book, but it's a great reference book, and it was given to me by one of the biomedical professors in biomedical engineering over at UVA, because I was trying to break into the healthcare, and he said, you need this book. So I've used it, and it has quite a bit of information on FDA and going through all that type of information too. So it's a good book to have. So other interesting links is I have those, the informatic, some of the information in my presentation. The footnotes are in the notes and links and not at each page. So I just want to really stress that the regulatory process is very complex. It's integrated, there's lots of people you have to talk to, and sometimes you'll get conflicting information. I've got an example of that too, but you know, sometimes you get that. So you've got to really delve into it, ask questions again, and just make sure, because once you go down a path, especially when you're doing clinical trials, once you get in that clinical trial mode, you can't change anything, because if you do, you have to start all over again. That costs money. So you have to be very careful as you proceed, thoughtful. And again, the classifications are based on type, regulatory control, and submission requirements. Each type has different controls. They have different forms to fill out, and each of the divisions, they have their own set. There's similarities, but there are also key differences. And one other thing that's really important, just because you get FDA approval or clearance, that does not ensure that the market exists for that product at all. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people that have told me, oh, but FDA cleared it, but I don't understand. Well, because there's no market there. So that brings you back to ICAP and customer discovery and the importance of knowing that before you go too far. And it's never too early to do your customer discovery. I've dealt with some theoretical physicists with customer discovery, and that's so far out there, and that helped them actually find other grant resources because they didn't know existed. So next steps would be understanding your regulatory responsibilities, start planning early. The earlier you start, the better off you are, so you understand it. Use the FDA resources, visit FDA rep often. The regulations change. They just had a change this morning. So they change often. Ask tons of questions. Don't assume. Make sure that you get their opinion and get it in writing. Okay, always get their stuff in writing. I learned that lesson too. Stay informed because they do and they can change, and make a friend with your FDA person. That is one of the most valuable things. They will help you. So I've got some stories. Unless there's other questions.
I'm sure it varies widely, but general timelines between getting approval class 1, 2, 3.
Class 3 is
Months, years, yeah.
years. They did have, and I didn't put it in here, but I did find a graphic that sort of gave estimates. And class 1s is the shortest. I think it was months to get that. And then class 2, depending, is months to years. And then class 3 is yeah.
So, Liz,
Yes.
can I just chime in on that?
Sure.
Part of the issue why it's important to talk to the FDA early is how long it takes is also in part what it is you're trying to prove. If you have a treatment that cures cancer or Alzheimer's and it takes years to see the outcome, that's going to be a long and expensive process. Great upside, but very expensive. So a lot of people will pick easier endpoints in their clinical trials. Like, we can reduce amyloid plaque. Maybe it'll help, maybe it won't. I mean, there was a drug that was just sort of approved for that. So there's a lot of strategy in terms of how long it takes and how you pick your endpoints. And to Liz's point, you need to talk to the FDA, because you can't go down that road thinking this is what you're going to do and not have the FDA's buy-in, or you could get sidewinded by them. So something to think about.
Yeah, and this is, did I hear a voice?
We do have a couple of questions in the chat, Liz, but I don't want to interrupt you or Philip.
Okay, well, let's get the question, the few questions.
Okay, Prakash, do you want to come off mute and ask your question to Liz?
Sure. So I've seen 510(k)s where they've had a primary and a secondary predicate. So what exactly, when is that needed, or what is that about in the context, I guess?
For having 2 predicates?
Yeah.
Well, again, that's a question for your FDA person that you're talking to, because they can guide you on that particular. Are you talking to an FDA person now?
Yeah, but even in the database, when we pulled a few, that we could see them in there, and so so I was just wondering if that's when is that done, or why is it done?
Good
So
question.
again, not to hog the conversation, it probably means they had 2 endpoints. They had 2 claims they wanted to make. So they had 2 predicate devices that had different outcomes. I think that's the only reason you would have more than one.
Okay, thanks.
We have
I actually can add to that a little bit. Again, the codes go back, coding goes back to your indications for use. Your indications for use relates to labeling, relates ultimately to marketing and what you can say and how you can market your device. So when you add more codes, right, you increase the number of indications for use for your device. So sometimes you need to pull in other medical devices that have those codes, not every device, predicate device that you're relying on will have the same exact codes. There's some overlap there, depending on what your device does.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Liz, we have one last question. Salit, go ahead.
So we're developing technologies that look at genetic data, next generation sequencing data, and possibly it could result in some sort of RT-PCR type of test. And we get mixed information. Some people say you have to go through the FDA. Some people say it's a CAP clear thing. Do you have any guidance or experience with that?
I've got some experience with that one. So, yes, I was working for a clinical lab. And it wasn't their main, they did metagenomic testing, but when COVID came out, the decision was to come up with a gold standard PCR test for detecting COVID. And since it was a test that was developed within the lab, it should be under CLIA regulations. However, FDA decided during COVID that they wanted to have some impact on that. And then we ended up like many small labs at that time caught in the middle. We had CLIA clearance, but FDA was saying, no, you have to have FDA. And so we were jumping through hoops, trying to meet FDA requirements, even though we knew, but FDA was coming in there and the government was getting involved. And so we went through, you have to have 30 samples. And we had a really good person that we were dealing with. We had to have 30 samples. We had our 30 samples. We gave our report. Guy came back, we need 30 more. Okay, we'll go get 30 more. What kind? Do you want positives, negatives, or unknowns? Well, we want this. And so we did that several times. And then we had silence. And so, okay, what's going on? We're trying to get this out there. We're trying to get everything going. And they changed personnel. So now we have a new person that doesn't know us, doesn't know what we've done. And they said, well, we want you to start all over again. And so we're going, but this is a clinical test. It's a lab test. No, you got to start all over again. So $100,000+ later, they come back and they say, oh, no, it's a CLIA test. You don't need us. But that's what we had to do. So
what's your advice? Do we basically go with the CAP clear and then talk to some FDA just to get something in writing that we don't have to go through them?
yeah, so we did go back and say, okay, you changed your mind now. I want that in writing, that you are not requiring us to have an FDA for this test that was developed and covered by CLIA. So I would go back to them and make sure that they put in writing what they want you to do.
I can shed a little light too, because we had a similar but a more positive experience. We found out earlier that you don't need to do that. And we actually developed an LDT that we're actually running here at George Mason for COVID testing, right here in the CAP lab. That's what was used to screen the entire campus. Now, eventually we moved to an EUA, an FDA EUA, which like there were over 300 of these kinds of tests that were out there.
Oh, yeah.
The FDA had put on an initial EUA, and then all of a sudden they stopped accepting EUAs.
Yeah, we got ours in for the EUA.
It's clear, right?
It's clear.
And so the way it works is and my understanding of it was the FDA has enforcement discretion over CMS's authority over CLIA, right? CLIA stands for Clinical Laboratory Improvement. It's a program that's run by CMS, Center for Medicare Services, that oversees that. They have a whole part of CMS that oversees the CLIA lab. And if you're a clinical lab, which you actually have here on campus, Dr. Leota and others run that lab upstairs, you can actually, any test that you can reproducibly do, you can offer that can provide a clinical result as long as you're following clear rules. So many of the cancer diagnostics that are out there are not FDA approved.
Right.
They're CLIA lab developed tests. A few are, and those are the ones that you're more commonly familiar with, that
Mhm.
might even be easier prescribed. Whether or not to go down that road with the FDA depends on your market
Right.
and what your claims are. So if your claims are sort of on the minimalist side, then there's one school of thought that says if you're doing a genetic thing, then it's more like in consumer land and 23andMe.
Mhm.
Because anybody can take a 23andMe test. They have a version of that test that doesn't tell you any
And-
health information.
And how long did it take 23andMe to get?
About 7 years, and I know their CEO to the
Yeah.
front, right? So, and they got smacked hard on the wrist, almost shut down, because when they first issued their test, it was everything in the kitchen sink, and we're trying to be everyone's genetic.
Yeah.
test. So they kind of set the roadmap a little bit for some of these genetic tests, and I encourage you to kind of look at that whole evolution, because this field is so rapidly emerging that also on the FDA side, what we've been finding is that it's new for everybody.
It's new for
So
everybody.
you're just gonna have to have some patience, because it's not always, there's not always gonna be the personnel on the FDA side to
Right.
really decipher those decisions right away.
And that's why I said it's really important to keep on top of the FDA, because things are changing all the time as, you know, we change as the technology changes, and it's really hard for the government to stay up to date, yet we need to get these things out. But it was really frustrating, and if,
So I'll share another sort of idea for you all. This is something that was helpful to us, is they have other programs. There's one called the BDD program, the Breakthrough Device Designation Program. And we are putting in a DDD. Again, part of it to get some of these questions answered and look at, present some of the data we have from one of our tests and say, hey, do you think this is good? Now, a BDD is not an approval, but it's an FDA saying, hey, we like what you're doing, and we will classify as a breakthrough device
that's good.
designation. And so that's part of the reason I think they created that program. was
Is
to
that
help
new? That's
facilitate
new?
some of these. It's been around about 5 or 6 years, I think.
That's pretty new.
But it's a good program, particularly for early stage products, because you can get some of this feedback and, you know, get a sense of the massive amount of data you're going to need to require,
Yeah.
provide.
Okay, thank you. Who is speaking in the audience? Because I'm in the online, so I'm just curious.
Dr. Cunningham, I'm with Polaris Genomics. We make genetic diagnostic tests for mental behavioral health disorders, so we're right in that lane that you're talking about.
Okay, I'm Slee Jaffe, Professor George Mason, so
Yeah,
thank
great.
you.
Yeah, and our CEO is a former branch chief of neurological devices at the FDA, so that's why I know a lot about this stuff.
You could have given this.
It's been a learning curve for me, because I never dealt externally with the FDA, so it can be tough, but I think these are all
It's-
really good advice points about being in communication.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions?
Hey, Liz, can you ask if the owl is still turned on? Because we can't see the other members of the audience.
So
It's,
it wasn't working.
Oh, I see.
Instead of being
Okay.
disruptive, I decided just to. try
yeah,
the
we've had a few little
video off.
technical glitches.
It appeared it died.
No worries. Thank you.
We need a test and a cure. So, one of the other story I was, and Philip may actually jump in on this one, is, it was a male reproductive health, and there was missteps. We talk about the importance of communication. And they had some missteps with communicating with the FDA and setting up some of their original clinical trial, and also setting up some of the, I forgot the word, now some of the levels of what they were looking for in their results. And it ended up where,
It was the number, it was a sperm count.
right, it was a sperm count of what was the threshold. And the company wanted a certain threshold, and they did all their research, their trial based on that. And then FDA came in and said, no, we want a different threshold. And no matter what the PI said, they wanted that threshold. So they had to start all over again and redo their clinical trial, which cost a lot of money, which as investors in the company, they weren't real happy about that. So some of these things too, you have to take the investors, what is the impact on potential investors down the road? So that one I heard about. And the other one was, Actually, the one about labeling. I was working with a company in Charlottesville that had a medical device. And so we were working and made really good friends with the FDA person, back and forth asking lots of questions. And we had our device out there, research use only. We had it on our website. And I get this call and she said, Liz, how are you doing? Have you looked at your website lately? And I go, well, yeah, why, what's going on? You've got a word on there you must take out off your website right now. What was that? And the diagnosis. You can't diagnose something. A doctor diagnoses. You can test to see if something's present, but you can't diagnose. Get that off before we have to come back and, you know, tell you to pull the product off the market and fine you. So I said, oh, okay, what word can I use in place of? She goes, I don't care as long as it's not diagnosed, diagnostic, whatever. So immediately pulled off the website, had discussion with our marketing person who got so mad at me, he was red in the face. And I said, we need to come up. So we brainstormed, we came up with a couple of ways of saying the same thing without saying it. And so by having that relationship, she gave me a heads up before it became a real problem. So communication with your people, and making them part of the team is really, really key. Back in the day, what I used to do is actually would make a road trip from Charlottesville up to physically meet the people from FDA. So you had a face. Now with Zoom, you can zoom it in if they have time. So those are my three stories. They're common stories that happen. So with a little thought ahead of time, you can get through it. Just be patient with yourself and with the, yes.
So if you want, we can meet the FDA people with the questions or.
They're trying to put in some sort of an interface now where there's a helpline, but they don't have that now. But you can find out through the FDA who is the person that's sort of in charge of your area that you're building your product in, and you can reach out to them. Now, whether they're doing face-to-face meetings now, it's been several years since I have done that. But I used to make a trip up from Charlottesville to Washington to meet them. Because I always thought it's harder to say no when you've seen their face. So I would do that. But I would caution and say that if you're going to contact the FDA, before you contact that person, you do your homework. And you research this stuff. What they don't want to do is to take somebody who hasn't even looked at their website, hasn't even made an attempt to figure it out, because they're not going to do it for you. So you want to make sure that you present yourself, that you have looked at the FDA, you have specific questions, that you have. Yeah, because they have tons of work they're doing, and they're probably understaffed.
Yeah, we try to submit the medical device class 2 details, but the competitors in Korea, they submitted the same device. They submitted many times, but they got a lot of revision. You say test 30 more, something like similar kind of a revision came back to them.
Yeah. So
can we ask the FDA, can you reference that competitor's case to ask him a question? Is that fine or?
Any question is an okay question. I mean,
we're just wondering if we submitted this medical device from Korea or here maybe more chance to get it through.
I would think from here would be better, but again, that's my opinion. I would say to be on the cautious side, I would contact FDA and ask them, is this something, has this a situation similar to this ever happened before? you can even reference it that way without your specific thing. Is it, have you ever had a situation where? And then see what they say. And then you can say, well, okay, that has happened. Where can I find some information on that? Or is there somebody specific I can talk to that can help me through a process like that? Because I have a situation that may be similar. Customer discovery.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have one question, Liz. GLP versus GLP-like, as you're doing some preclinical work, and thinking that there could be a submission, does GLP-like have any value in a submission, or would you need to be rigorous in the GLP?
I would be rigorous, but that's just me being cautious. I don't like to leave a crack in a door so something could go in that might derail.
Yeah. Thank you.
Or slow things down.
Or slow
Right,
things
so
down.
if there's less information.
Yeah.
It'll slow things down, and then they'll come back with questions,
Yeah.
and you gotta go back, and so that.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to
3
give them.
months to 3 years is where that window ends up being.
Yeah,
So
'cause
the
one
more
of the-
you're able to explain it, and like you're explaining it to a 10-year-old, the better.
Yeah, one of the things too, just working with other government agencies, you want to find that balance. You don't want to, you want to give them, you don't want to give them too much information.
Mhm.
Because then they get information overload and then they start asking you tons of questions that may not even be relevant. But you don't want to give them too little information because then it's like, they feel like you don't know what you're doing. You may not have something there. You're fishing. So you need to find that good balance.
So for those on the line, so this is Amy Adams. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Biohealth Innovation. I guess a resource then to be aware of, not GLP, but ICAP CLIA laboratory at Mason. And we have a couple in the Institute for Advanced Biomedical Research building that a lot of us are sitting here in. And they have capacity to be able to support diagnostic tests,
Oh, cool.
et cetera. So happy to make any introductions to the CAP-CLIA team to see if there could be a partnership there, if there's a need.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Oh, always looking for connections. Because as you know, it's such a huge organization. There's so many different individual situations. There can't be anybody out there that is an expert in the whole thing called FDA.
Yeah, one other kind of bit of advice that I would offer just from recent experience, I think the point you made about knowing if you have a market is very, very important. So, maybe if you're a startup doing something of a market research study, or even we did a reimbursement study. So
Yeah, that's another discussion is the, insurance reimbursement.
if you hope to develop a product that you want to get reimbursed for, Medicare or Medicaid or anything, or have a payer, a healthcare payer pay for it, I feel like you're required to do that. Because as she said, even if your product is FDA approved, if there's no reimbursement after you have trouble selling.
Yeah.
So I think you'll learn a lot of things from that and help make some of those, should I go CLIA versus.
And that's another organization that I've have some not a lot, but some experience with, that if you make a really good friend, they can really help you a lot, especially with the codes and understanding all the different codes.
So again, consultants on that side are very helpful, but to her point, whether you work with reimbursement consultants or FDA approval, regulatory consultants, they're just kind of directing you to do the work, or directing the work that you're doing, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And like, what all you need, you have to kind of run the process or contribute all of the important stuff is what I'm trying to say.
Right, and with CMS, if you use a consultant and that consultant codes wrong, you're liable for it, and you can be banned from, because I've seen that situation happen too, which is sad.
And I would say with regard to the FDA consultants, try to find people who have FDA experience. You want people who formerly worked in ideally the branches that you're going to apply to, because that just makes the process.
Oh, yeah, because they've got friends, they can.
They know.
Yeah, so. Well, great. This has been, I hope you found this helpful. I know it's just part one, and it was just, we hit on a lot of different things. Again, I'll make the slide deck. I have to make a few changes, but then I'll make the slide deck available if anybody wants it. And if you have any questions, you know where to find me. I'm easy to find. And also, I really strongly suggest if you have not looked into the ICAP program, again, it's at no cost to you, but the access to resources and to different people is invaluable. And of the 20 or so of us that are the mentors, we have all had companies. We've all been there, done that. We've had some failures, we've had some successes, so we know the path you're walking on. We have felt the pain. So with that, I don't have anything else. How about up in the sky there, Lisa or
Yeah,
Philip?
hi Liz. So I just wanted to let everyone know who's here virtually that if you have questions, once Liz concludes the presentation in person, anyone who has questions may stay behind to speak with William and Philip. So if you are here on Zoom and you have questions, feel free to stay behind and we will make sure that your questions are answered. Thank you.
Okay.
That's a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much.
So if you haven't eaten, there's food. If you have any other questions, I'm here.
The tour, and we'll be picking up a tour here pretty much 2 years in. I mean, we might as well do now just so that I'm streamline it.
Yeah, I wanted, that's why I ended now, is because I wanted to make sure that you all had time to go and still stay within that 2 hours.
Can I get a raise of hands of the room?
So Liz, you're doing delivery?
Aren't you funny?
I'll take my roast beef with rye, please.
Yeah. You're funny.
You should come join us.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm 3,000 miles away, unfortunately.
Well, when the three of us are together again, we have to go out for some drinks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we will sign off, so you don't hear the background here, but great seeing everybody today. Thanks so much and hope you all enjoyed it. And I know that everyone can continue on with questions for Philip and William.
Thank you, Amy. Thanks for hosting.
Thanks, Amy.
Take care. All right. So I will go ahead and open it up to anyone who has questions. If you're online, feel free to come off mute.
Everything you ever wanted to know and were afraid to ask.
Right.
I just wanted to say I put it in the chat when Liz was speaking. I thought she did a great job, by the way. That was really a good presentation.
Yeah,
the importance of a pre-sub meeting with the FDA. Every company I've worked with and others, and some of the private companies I'm working with, I really encourage them to get that meeting with the FDA, especially if you're going to do any clinical work. Because when you get that pre-meeting and get the notes, making sure it's documented, you have an idea. Because if you spend the money on and the time on developing a clinical trial, and then you haven't spoken to the FDA, and then you get ready for your submission and they said, well, we wanted this additional information, and you didn't know it, and you may have known it before. It can be devastating to a company, so I really encourage everybody to, if you're thinking about doing a submission, get a pre-sub meeting. You have to have your act together, get ready to go, but do a pre-sub meeting, with the FDA prior to moving forward with that. It just can save you a lot of time, and it helps you to establish that relationship that Liz was talking about. That's very important, the relationship with the FDA as you start the process.
Gary, or do you happen to know, or Philip even, do you happen to know how many meetings are you allowed pre-meeting? It's not, I guess it's not an open number of meetings, but is there
I don't know. I'm not aware of anybody who's like experienced a limit on that. There may be, I don't know, but you don't want to waste their time either. I mean, that's as bad as not talking to them. You know, if you're asking frivolous questions, you get your act together before you have that first meeting.
Yeah.
And then you should be ready to go, you know, with that, so that you can cover everything you need to cover then.
And I haven't done this now in a long time, but the way it used to be is you have your pre-meeting and they kind of give you a point person. And then if you have questions along the way, you can email them and sort of ask them questions. And short of another meeting, they should be willing to respond.
Right. Yeah.
So the only other thing we didn't really talk about is, you know, the FDA's charter is safety and efficacy, but the other thing they sometimes will look at is clinical efficacy. And example of that, we had a drug that shrunk liver tumors, but it turns out the patients didn't live any longer. They died pretty much, even though their tumors were much smaller. And the FDA basically said, look, you're doing exactly what you said you were going to do. You're shrinking tumors, but we're not going to accept it as an effective drug, because in the end, people die at the same rate they did before. And then we pivoted and we went for a quality of life indication, which was very different. But for people who have these huge liver tumors, if you can shrink the liver tumor, it's a huge impact on their lifestyle. So and that's changed over the years, and I don't know where they are today.
I can add into that, Philip, because for those who don't know, I worked in AstraZeneca for 24 years, so we had some exposure to this. And back in the early days, the FDA focus was really very much on the safety part, and efficacy was okay. It was like secondary, but the safety was the key thing, and it has shifted much more towards efficacy. But what you're also mentioning touches upon what one has as the primary outcome for a trial as well. And so there can be, you know, if you go for a trial that says you're going to make people survive X amount of time longer, then you may or may not get that. Then it's that would come in as you might go as a secondary endpoint or a subsequent phase 4 study showing about the actual clinical efficacy part. So, but they are shifting definitely more towards that you have to demonstrate a clinical efficacy, which makes for longer trials as well. Most often.
The other thing we didn't talk about, maybe we should talk about next time, is sort of the whole notion of off-label use.
Yeah.
A lot of products get approved with less than you know, we cure something, they go for an easier indication, you know, we help, or we do something else that might be useful, knowing full well that clinicians, once it's available to them, will start using it, not necessarily on the label it was indicated. And that's one of those things where the FDA doesn't really acknowledge it happens, but they all know it happens.
The FDA also cannot tell a doctor how to practice medicine. So
Right.
if a doctor chooses to use a product off label, that is their choice.
Yes.
But the FDA is not a practicing physician, and
Right.
they clearly stay out of that, telling doctors how to practice. Okay.
Any other questions for the mentors?
When Philip and Liz and I were talking about Liz's presentation yesterday, we also touched on like combination here, where the device might be delivering a drug, for example. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that. I don't think Liz touched on that too much for this presentation, maybe in a future one. But that's becoming a more, I guess, more common.
Right, so one of the first examples that were stents that were put, to prevent blockage in arteries, and they started putting drugs on those stents to prevent reblockage. So it was what was called a drug-eluting stent. So is it a device or is it a drug? And the FDA battled with that for a while, and now has come up with this classification that it's a combination. Unfortunately, what happens is you end up being held to the higher standard, which tends to be the drug standard, not the device standard. But more and more, the distinction between drugs and devices is getting fuzzy. I mean, if you think about an implantable pump, is that a drug or a device? Well,
yeah.
It's also, I had a client that had, it was a temporary need when somebody had a total joint replacement and they got a post-operative infection. They have to take the old implant out. They put a temporary in that is also a drug delivery device. And so to fight the infection, and then they had that same issue with its, they had a device and the drug delivery on that. So I think it's becoming more common.
Yeah.
Yeah, I listened to Liz's presentation and I think, why does anyone ever go down this road?
Oh, God.
I think you have a question, feel free to come up, chat.
Yeah, so I just, want to just ask a similar question that I asked to Liz. So we're basically coming up with a diagnostic to recommend to the doctor, which drug you can use, which will be more effective for the patient using the genetic information. So that's, my feeling is it doesn't have to go to the FDA, but, I'm worried because some people say you need to go to the FDA because oncologists won't use it or believe it if you don't go through the FDA or, other reasons. Do you have any insight into, basically diagnostic tests that basically make recommendations to the doctors about what treatment they should use, how that should go? Was it basically contributing how leaving the decision up to the oncologist what to do?
So if your test is determining whether you should use drug A or drug B, that's a pretty clinically relevant prediction. You're not just saying, hey, your XYZ is elevated or depressed. You're actually now saying, choose a drug. And that, in my mind, will require, the FDA is going to want to have you demonstrate that when you make that choice, there is in fact a positive impact. They're not going to let you say, for all they know, it's random. And so they need to see proof that by using your test and making a prediction, there is in fact a better outcome than if you don't use your test to predict which one is going to be more effective. So I don't know how you're going to get around going to the FDA.
Okay, so you're going to have to do both a longitudinal and a interventional type trial for that then?
Well, again, it depends on what you claim. If you claim, this test will indicate that, there is more of this binding receptor on this tumor, now you doctor, you may believe that some of these drugs are more effective against that binding receptor. That's a different statement than saying, if you see this binding receptor, you should use drug A because you'll have a better outcome, right? It's subtle in terms of how you say things, but it has a huge impact. As Liz indicated, the words matter. They wordsmith those black boxes that they put in the drugs very carefully. But if I were you or advising you, I would say you can't go down this road without talking to the FDA.
Okay.
Also, I can't imagine the physician, an oncologist, whoever is going to take that recommendation seriously unless you have significant data backing up your recommendation. And if you're going to go to the effort of collecting that data, you might as well do a submission, or at least make sure that, what the FDA is going to require that, because you're going to need the data no matter what.
Yeah, we have retrospective data on public data that about 800 patients showing that, it does work. But we have to, I think have to go with, actual working with clinicians and getting them, not retrospective data, basically interventional data or some other data.
So the other thing, we talk about when we do customer discovery, is who are the saboteurs? So the people who make these drugs may very well look at you and say, oh, we don't like this product because it's telling them to use the other guy's product and not ours. We'd rather they try ours and the other guys and see which one works. So you may also want to think about, could you team up with some of the drug makers if one of the drug is more effective, as a way for them to say, hey, use this test because, there's a good chance our drug will be effective.
Yeah, Philip, that's there's a variant that sometimes happened, and mostly in the oncology area, where there would be a companion diagnostic developed alongside a new drug. So, for example, if the drug might be developed to treat a particular variant of the receptor, carrying a particular mutation, and the companion diagnostic would test that. So the drug was intended only to be given to a result that was positive in the diagnostic test. And it's a subtle variant of what we're discussing here as well. But Philip's point's well taken, Salita. It might be worth having a conversation also with the companies whose products would match to your outcome.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions before we conclude? Okay, well, I know that we will put the final touches on the presentation that Liz provided during the presentation, and then a replay will be uploaded to the website, which will be available to share with other teammates and other clients. So if there's nothing else, thank you all for being here, and we'll call it a wrap.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.